Hey, here are 5 stupid things I've noticed about The Lord of the Rings.
Alright, so this has been a while in the making, and part of it feels like I've been ignoring this video topic. I haven't, in fact. I've been researching for this video pretty consistently for a long time. However, due to a combination of real life and personal projects, this video has been delayed, but no more. Here it is, my first video response to someone, of which the quality I am proud of. Firstly, who are we responding to? Well, it's none other than the infamous Steve Shive. This infamous person is infamous for blocking almost anyone with any form of mere disagreement. Heck, he blocked my brother before he was even falsely reported. Before we begin, I want to state for the record that I don't hate Steve Shive, or really have much of an opinion on him for that matter. I merely felt that I made this video because it was really bad. In fact, the reason I made this video was that it was absolute dishonesty and misunderstanding of basic Lord of the Rings / Tolkien lore. Now, before I begin, I wish to state that I am a Tolkien fan, but that doesn't stop me from presenting logical arguments. I also mean to state, please don't harass Steve. Just don't. It's not worth your energy. He'll just block you anyway. Also, Steve Shives, please try to actually watch this. If you do intend to watch it, not just block it. Of course, I know that's really hard for you. Okay, so Steve's video is divided into 7 parts: an intro, 5 points that try to point out problems with Tolkien's work, and an outro. I will play these parts in their entirety, then break them down from a logical perspective, both to provide context for my arguments and to avoid accusations that I'm taking Steve Shives out of context. So let's start with this video's first point, that Tolkien's plagiarized from Wagner.
Tolkien ripped it off from Wagner. And don't you Tolkien-worshipping Hobbit lovers even try to deny it. J.R.R. Tolkien was an educated man. He wrote a story about mythical characters fighting over a magic ring that had the power to rule the world. And when he was asked whether any of his story was derived from that of Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle, Tolkien said that the only similarity between his novels and Wagner's operas was that both rings were round. Right. And the only similarity between Bram Stoker's Dracula and F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu is that both villains had sharp teeth. What an asshole.
Now, this is a common belief among quote-unquote progressives types. I won't get into why, but for my in-depth research, several sources, which will be linked in the description for those curious, there are problems stemming from similarities that the two works share. I'll list them and make rebuttal. Firstly, they are the use of rings, dwarves, and similar leitmotifs and themes. What other than plagiarism, the critics say, could have inspired Tolkien? The problem here is that Wagner himself was not original, drawing inspiration from previous Nordic myths. Don't believe me? There's a myth literally called the Song of the Nibelungs. Tolkien, a scholar interested in mythologies, would have likely read these before reading Wagner's work. It is here the concept of rings, dwarves, and other such fantastic elements could have entered Tolkien's mind. Of course, it must be stated that the similarities of leitmotifs and themes mostly apply to adaptations, and as such can be ignored, which is why I haven't stated them before now. To be intellectually honest, we must all agree that speculation on my behalf, if only there was a primary source that everyone had access to, their form analysis of. Oh wait, this is a quote you see in the screen that Steve Shives dismisses is the only source that anyone should consider. It states that the only similarity Wagner's work Tolkien has is that they share a same ring. So in essence, Steve literally dismisses the one piece of evidence, the sole piece, mind you, that could actually prove his argument. Way to go, Steve. So that quote clearly denies any influence. With that and previous evidence that I provided, it would seem the logical conclusion is that both Tolkien and Wagner share similarities not due to plagiarism, but to a shared mythological origin. This would be like, to make an analogy, if two writers wrote about the Bible, and you said one plagiarized the other because they both used the name Jesus. I hope you see how silly this is, Shives.
It's incredibly racist and elitist. I'm not even talking about the films, which cast white actors in the heroic roles while repeatedly characterizing the evil they opposed as black. Now, actually, I don't think there's that much there. What I'm talking about is how all of the so-called free people of Middle-earth lived in these rigidly segregated, separate societies, with the elves over there, and the dwarves over there, and the hobbits over there, and all the evil people down there in that dark, forbidding region to the south. And judging by how Elf Girl's dad, Agent Smith, reacted when she said she wanted to marry her human boyfriend, Moses Hochleitner, they don't cotton to miscegenation neither.
Okay, so this is a very dense part of Steve's videos. In fact, it might be segments like this. Our reason response videos often stop so many times because it's so easy for someone like Steve to say something with so many logical fallacies, but it takes a lot longer to refute. As such, unlike the first part, I'm going to have to unfortunately break this down point by point. Timestamps will be provided for the Steve Shive video on screen at all times for the duration of this segment. Firstly, I'd like to say that I would commend Steve for judging the source material and not the adaptations. We both seem to agree that there wouldn't be much there. However, Steve, in this video, the majority of images, 3 out of 5 in fact, are from the movies. This will be relevant later. Second, Steve takes issues with the quote-unquote free people being quote-unquote neatly segregated. Let's just ignore the fact that there's actually distinct races that can't be explained away by simple social constructs, and as such, comparisons to the real world are fundamentally broken. Middle-earth appears to be in a time/period roughly equivalent to the Dark/Middle Ages. Europe at this time was almost unrecognizable to the modern eye. Look in places such as the England, Italy, France, Germany, Spain. They were nearly all divided into many small petty states, which is quite similar to Middle-earth. Seeing as this time period is influenced Tolkien, that's not surprising. Also, the Mimi show doesn't know geography. I'd just like to point that out there. Also, even with this in mind, Steve is wrong about how quote-unquote neatly segregated everyone is. One of the very first places the company of Frodo goes to after leading Hobbiton is the town of Bree, a place where humans and hobbits, in Tolkien's words, the big and little people, coexist in near harmony. That plus the fact that all the free people unite to oppose the dark forces of Sauron is a message of unity that seems very progressive, more than what you think it is. Also, I almost forgot to add this in. Steve Shives implies that all the villains come from the south. Not true. There is a large number of goblins in the northern Misty Mountains, not to mention the dragons that both come from the northern wastelands. So very clearly it's not a southern thing. The third point Steve makes ties into the first one, as I mentioned earlier. According to Steve, it's problematic that Elrond doesn't want his daughter to marry Aragorn, which implies they're racist. All, of course, wrapped up in a nice, stereotypical southern accent. This is going to be fun to discuss because it's so fundamentally broken. Firstly, this isn't about having sex. Elrond is upset because his only daughter will now feel an untimely and painful death if he marries Aragorn, who, might I add, is unlikely to be able to beat Sauron, leaving her being killed by Sauron. And also, she will lose her husband before she herself dies. He's showing the basic father instincts and concern. How is that problematic? If your daughter fell in love with someone and you know it would lead to her untimely death, would you just be cool with it? I mean, come on. I press down on that. Also, really, the southern accent? You do know anti-miscegenation laws were the norm until 1967. Even in the liberal coastal paradise of California had those laws. It's not a South thing. Wonder if you'd be okay if I spoke in Ebonics accent for the rest of the video. though I don't think you'd be okay with that, so I'm not going to do it because I'm not a racist, unlike you are, Steve.
It ruined Peter Jackson. When he accepted his Oscar for Return of the King, Peter Jackson referred somewhat embarrassedly to his early days as a filmmaker, when he made movies like Bad Taste and Dead Alive. But what's he directed since? King Kong, which was twice as long as it needs to be, and The Lovely Bones, which is twice as shitty as anything needs to be. His best film is still Heavenly Creatures, which he co-wrote and directed 7 years before the first Lord of the Rings film opened. Give me the guy who made that, or those cheesy splatter horror films, over this ponderous, self-important hokum any goddamn day.
Now, this is just a third argument based pretty much nothing more than him sharing his opinion. But I would like to say it's not surprising that he hates high fiction yet loves average slasher films like Bad Taste. Not to say he has bad taste, but yeah, Heavenly Creatures is so overrated. King Kong is, in my opinion, the best Kong movie since the original, but I do admit it's kind of long. I haven't seen the Bone movie, so I don't have opinions on that. Although there's nothing really wrong with this point, and as such, I won't really go into it as much as I have in the others. Though I'd like to say I don't think it's necessarily the director's fault. Oftentimes, a lot of these problems come from the studios. But hey, he's entitled to like his really average movies, and I'm entitled to like mine. So, don't harass him for this. It's silly.
Stupid names. For a work so grave and humorless, The Lord of the Rings sure is full of silly, made-up proper nouns. Look, let me give you an example. I'm just going to read one paragraph from the Wikipedia article about the One Ring. The One Ring was created by the Dark Lord Sauron during the Second Age in order to gain dominion over the free peoples of Middle-earth. In disguise as Anatar, or Lord of Gifts, he aided the elven smiths of Eregion and their leader Celebrimbor in the making of the Rings of Power. He then forged the One Ring himself in the fires of Mount Doom. Am I really supposed to take this seriously? Well, yes, apparently, because...
Oh my. Well, this is a very silly point. Firstly, to talk about that meme, Boromir is not actually a type of laxative. This so perplexed me, I decided to actually do some research. Which, I've done for the rest of this video, but this really influenced me to do it. So here's what I found, is that in 1969, there was a parody novel called Board of the Rings, written by Henry N. Beard and Douglas C. Kennedy, published in the Harvard Lampoon, inside of which there was a character called Bromosel, which is a stand-in for Boromir, very obviously. But Bromosel isn't even a laxative. It's actually a brand of antacid intended to relieve pain from heartburn, upset stomach, and indigestion. Its real name is Bromo Seltzer. A link to the references will be put in the description. So right off the bat, the visual reference you put in on the screen, or maybe your editor, is fundamentally mistaken in multiple ways. It confuses the Lord of the Rings with a poorly written parody of it. It confuses the characters of both. It also confuses an ingestion medicine for a laxative. This is just poorly done, man. Also, didn't you just say you weren't going to use movies, yet you use another one of the movie-based memes? Come on, let's be consistent here. To address Steve Shive's larger point is that the names are stupid. Once again, this is primarily subjective and a rarely weak problem to point out. But he's free to think that. A counter-argument I would make is that often names in different languages do often sound stupid or silly to outsiders. Even within the same languages, different regions can have radically different names. Let me give you a list of some weird British names, by no means exhaustive. Amat, Dulcia, Gonora, Hukin, Hound, Sean and Jen, Millicent. See what I mean? To these people, those names are normal, but to other groups, they might sound odd. Also, don't use Wikipedia as a source for simple things. It's just usually not a good source ever, unless used for very simple things, in which case it's fine.
It thinks it's great literature. Hey, it's a story about elves and wizards and dwarves in a time long ago, fighting to save the world by chucking a piece of jewelry into a volcano. It's a silly story with silly characters with silly sounding names. It's just a big, fun adventure, eh? It's A lightweight, pulpy distraction in the tradition of Robert E. Howard's Kull or Conan stories, right? Wrong. It's the single greatest and most important work of literature of the 20th century, a work of great depth and meaning by a serious author whose work must be taken seriously. Or at least that's the impression of The Lord of the Rings that its most fervent fans seem to have. But I disagree. I think that Tolkien's books and the interminable films made from them by Peter Jackson are joyless and self-serious with seemingly no awareness of how utterly inconsequential they are. I've seen dozens of films that handle similar themes much more skillfully. I've read 6-page comic book stories with far more emotional involvement, and if I ever want to see heroes with funny names dressed in armor and animal skins wielding swords, I'll watch He-Man. The hardest part is only picking 5. See you next time.
Alright, so this final point, more than any other, is really what got me to make this video. What makes great literature? That's a huge question, isn't it? Is it the financial success? Is it the exploration of thematic elements? Or is it merely how well written a book is? Is it the influence the book has? Is it the political message? By nearly each of these metrics, Lord of the Rings is great literature. Is it perfect? No. Is it the best literature of our time, or at least for the 20th century? No. But that's because literature is such a broad term, includes so many genres. Tolkien could not possibly be the greatest master in all genres. I'll say George Orwell is one of the best of the realistic fiction. Stephen Jay Gould is the best of science. Tolkien is merely, in my opinion, the greatest high fantasy of the 20th century. Its influence is everywhere, from adaptations to He-Man, which you mention as something you like. You would know that if you actually knew anything about that series. What do you think Skeletor got his inspiration? I can assure you it wasn't any of those pulps. It was most likely Lord of the Rings. But anyway. But of course, Steve is free to think what he wants. Like whether the earth is flat. You can believe it, I don't care. Now, when I started this video, it was one of a thing, and I didn't really want to do a series on Steve, but it turns out this is really just a recurring opinion within Steve's mind, as he see in his live journal is chocked full of innumerable screeds about how bad the series is. I'm serious. He-Man fanfiction he has made. He's made He-Man crossover fiction with Lord of the Rings, and trust me, it makes the Book of Mormon look like a literary masterpiece. A book even Mark Twain hated. So within this context of the video I've responded to, it really makes sense. Steve's misunderstandings and personal opinions are made in place of factual arguments. His use of these makes sense. He had no interest in actually making a valid argument. He, like Kentham, deliberately decided to misunderstand a subject, in his case, Tolkien. In conclusion, what is there to say? 3 of Steve Shive's points are little more than subjective opinions that can be very debated. One point is a misunderstanding of Norse mythology and inspiration that would have inspired both Wagner and Tolkien, and the second point is literally false. He ignored Bree and the various dwarven traders, not to mention real-world Europe during the Dark/Middle Ages. If you liked this video, therein say subscribe, like it. Any feedback is appreciated. Because of Kappa, my channel will have to do a fundamental change, meaning more historical videos and video responses than LEGO reviews. But I do intend to review the remaining LEGO sets I own before December 2nd. Anyway, that's about it. I'm the Dark Master. And remember, don't ask He-Man to do a hobbit's job.